Hi everyone, and welcome to the Australian Sewing Advice and Inspiration Facebook group Sew Along with this awesome design from Sweet Pea. Don't forget to use your 30% discount code that you will find in your group. There are also great prizes for the best Sew Happy Truck Tote that gets posted in the group as well. In this video, we will be showing you how to create one of the blocks using the embroidery machine, as well as the process that we use to assemble the tote bag. To begin, stitch your first piece of batting down to your hooped up stabilizer. With your applique scissors, carefully trim away the excess batting as close to the stitching as possible. Stitch the first placement line and then place fabric A right side up on top of the hoop covering that placement line and stitch down. Trim away only the bottom edge, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Place fabric B wrong side up on top of the bottom stitch down line from fabric A. Have it crossing over by about 1 centimeter and then the excess fabric towards the top of the hoop and stitch down. Then fold over and stitch down again. Embroider the quilting in the background. These are the rays from the sun. Embroider the first tire of the truck as well as the rim of the tire. Use the same applique process that we use for the top of the background for the front of the truck. Trim the fabric around the truck, but make sure you leave the excess fabric in the seam. Repeat the applique process for the window and trim. And finally, embroider the satin stitch around the truck and window. Remove your block from the hoop and trim the seams back to about 1/2 inch. Once you have made all of the required blocks, lay them out on your work surface in the correct order. Place the first 2 blocks of the front of the bag right sides together and pin along the joining edge. Move over to your sewing machine and stitch the 2 together. Iron the seam open on the back of the blocks and then also give the front a good press as well. Continue joining the remaining 4 blocks of the front of the bag using the same joining process. Then, join the rows together by placing right sides together, pinning and stitching along the joining edge. Iron the seam open on the back of the blocks. Continue joining on the final row. Repeat this whole process for all of the blocks for the back of the bag. Now to attach the top borders to the front and back of the bag. Take out your fabric D pieces and attach them to your batting 2 pieces by using spray adhesive. Place the front of the bag on top of one of the border pieces, matching the top raw edge and pin together. Move over to your sewing machine and stitch the 2 together, removing the pins as you go. Use your applique scissors to trim away the excess batting in the seam and be careful not to trim any of the stitching. Iron the border over and top stitch for a neat finish. Repeat this same process for the back of the bag. Now to attach the bottom border to the front and back of the bag. Take out fabric E, batting 3 and a layer of interfacing the same size and attach all 3 together by using either spray adhesive or by stitching together along the 2 long edges with a 1/4 inch seam. Place the front of the bag on top of the bottom border, matching the two raw edges, and pin together. Use your sewing machine and stitch together using about a 1/2 inch seam. If you stitch the border fabric and batting together, there will be a row of stitching in the seam that you will need to unpick. Then with your applique scissors, go ahead and trim the batting out of the seam. Iron the border over and top stitch for a neat finish. Repeat this same process to attach the back of the bag to the opposite edge of the bottom border. Now use a rotary cutter and ruler to trim the edges of the top and bottom borders so they are in line with the sides of the front and back of the tote bag. With your lining fabric on top of your work surface, place the outside of the tote bag on top of the fabric F wrong sides together and pin around the edges. Use your rotary cutter and ruler to trim the two long edges so they are in line with the sides of the bag, and then trim the two short edges about 1/2 inch from the tops of the bag. Remove the pins and put aside the lining fabric and bag for later use. Now to make the straps. Take out the two fabric G pieces and use spray adhesive to adhere interfacing to the backs of the fabric. Starting with one strap at a time, fold over the long edges about 1 centimeter and then iron the folds. Fold in half and iron the fold again. Using your sewing machine, top stitch along both long edges and also make sure that the bobbin thread and top thread match the colour of the strap. Place the bag right side up on top of your work surface and then place your straps on top of the front and back of the bag. We place the ends about 2 inches in from the sides of the bag. Pin the straps to the bag and then use your sewing machine to stay stitch them in place. Now to sew the rest of the bag together. Fold over the back of the bag so it is right sides together with the front of the bag and pin along the side edges. Use your sewing machine to stitch along the edges that you have just pinned using about a 1/2 inch seam. Using sharp scissors, very carefully cut into the bottom fold of the seam that you just stitched. Be very careful not to trim into any of the stitching though. We do this step so we can then flatten the seam. To box out the bottoms of the bag, start by flattening one of the bottom corners. Use pins to keep in place and then using a ruler and pen mark a 45-degree angle, and how far in you mark will depend on how deep you want your bag to be. We marked about 3 to 4 inches from side to side. Use your sewing machine to stitch along that marked line. With scissors, trim about 1/4 inch from the stitching. Repeat the same process for the opposite corner, and then turn the bag right sides out and push the bottom corners out. Now take out your lining fabric and fold it in half. Iron along the fold and then open out. You should be left with a nice crisp crease down the center. Using a rotary cutter and ruler, cut the lining fabric in half, using the crease as a guide. Place the now 2 pieces of lining fabric right sides together and pin along the 2 long edges as well as the bottom edge. In the bottom edge, you will want to leave a gap of about 5 inches, but you may have to adjust this width depending on how far in you stitched when boxing the corners of the bag. Move over to your sewing machine and stitch only along the pinned edges with about a 1/2 inch seam, making sure you leave the gap in the bottom edge. Use the same technique that you used for the bag now to box out the bottom of the lining. With your lining still wrong sides out and the bag still right sides out, slip the lining over the outside of the bag. Match the raw edges together and pin right around the top of the bag. Use your sewing machine to stitch the two together using about a 1/2 inch seam. And now pull the bag through the opening in the lining. Fold the raw edges of the opening inwards, pin together and sew it closed. Push the lining down into the bag and iron along the top edges. And finally, use your sewing machine to top stitch right around the top of the bag, making sure the bobbin thread matches the lining colour and the top thread matches the top border colour. And there you have it, you have now finished the Sew Happy Truck Tote Bag. Good luck, and we can't wait to see everyone's projects.